And this is the last part of our lesson on expressions. So in this lesson, we're going to look at some word problems. We got Gotta Have It is a small company who sells U-phones. Isn't that funny? U-phones, not iPhones. Okay, let X represent the number of phones. So right here, what we call this is called defining the variable. Sorry that my defining got so messed up, but we're defining the variable. They did that for you. But if you came across a word problem and it had no variable, but you wanted to write an equation or an expression, you would want to define the variable. What does the variable represent? So we're using X to represent the number of phones. Each U-phone sells for $585. Write an algebraic expression to represent the revenue of selling X U-phones. So what would the revenue expression be? Does anybody know? Yes, 585X, because that means we're going to multiply however many phones we sell by 585. Now this says to evaluate. So right here what we did was translate. Evaluate means we're going to plug a number in. So evaluate your revenue expression to determine the company's revenue for the sale of 75 U-phones. Interpret your results in a complete sentence. A lot of people will miss that part of the instruction. So I'm kind of modeling for you. I'm one of those people who just likes to skip the instructions and go straight to the math. But when it comes to a word problem, we really need to read it over. And we should always read it over. It's just one of those lazy things that I do sometimes. So the revenue is going to be 585 for 75 phones. And if we multiply that out, who can tell me, what do you get? Yeah, a big number, 43,875. Now, when we interpret it in a complete sentence, we're actually saying, what does this number represent? So who could give me a complete sentence answer for this? If you sell 75 phones, the revenue is 43,875. Does that sound about right? Okay, let's do the next one. The company has production costs of $177 per U-phone plus additional overhead costs of $8,200. Find an algebraic expression to represent the cost of producing X number of U-phones. Who could tell me what would be an expression for the cost? Any thoughts about that? Make it up. No. So the overhead, that's a really good question. The overhead, usually when you have like a fixed cost like that, that might be just for the warehouse or maybe. Exactly. 177X plus 8,200. Because otherwise, man, those U-phones would be expensive if you had to pay $8,000 per U-phone. Evaluate the cost expression to determine the company's cost for producing 75 U-phones. So how would I do this? Take the 177 times the 75, and then we would add 8,200. I'm going to do that on my calculator to make it a little easier for myself. I don't know my 177 times tables by heart, or even my 75 actually, plus 8,200 equals, luckily the cost for producing this many U-phones was less than the revenue. Otherwise, what would happen to our business? But again, we want to interpret it in a complete sentence. The cost for producing 75 phones is $21,475. Okay, an expression for the profit is determined by subtracting the total costs from the total revenue. Find an algebraic expression to represent the profit for selling X U-phones. Simplify your results. So they just said we're going to take the revenue and we're going to subtract the cost. So my revenue was 585X X, I want to subtract all of the cost. So what should I make sure that I do if I want to subtract all of the cost? I'm going to use parentheses. So here's my revenue minus my cost. The cost was 177X plus. Now, before last class, we were actually talking about the idea of distributing the negative. You guys remember when we did that? So if we distribute the negative, because here the cost, this is positive, but actually it's going to come out of my revenue, right? So if I distribute the negative, that's the simplifying. So I have 585X minus 177X minus, do you see how that fixed cost turned into a negative? Does that make sense? How the fixed cost became a negative? All right, and then what would you do to simplify this further? Yes, because for every iPhone you sell, or Uphone, I should say, you're earning this much, but it's costing you that. So you have to actually subtract the two. 408X minus 8,200. So this would be right here, our simplified version. If we want to evaluate the profit expression to determine the company's profits for selling 75 Uphones, interpret your results. So now if I want to find the profit, I'm going to say for every phone, I'm going to earn 408 for 75 phones, but then I have to take out the fixed cost. Okay? So here we have, I'm going to do it on my calculator. So I have 408 times 75 minus the 8,200. And we get 22,400. And actually, if you look at the numbers that are on the screen, you see here was my revenue, here was my cost, and here's my profit. If I take that 43,875 and I subtract the 21,475, what do you expect when I push enter? What do you expect that number to be? Any thoughts on what it should be? Yes, the same number, right? Because we took the original revenue for 75 phones, the cost for 75 phones, and then if I subtract the revenue or the cost from the revenue, I will get the profit. So the profit for selling 75 Uphones, is 22,400. Okay. Any questions so far on that?